Welcome to History Teller YT, where the ancient world breathes again through storytelling. Today, we begin a journey deep into one of the most extraordinary chapters of human civilization, the world of Hammurabi, King of Babylon, creator of one of the very first written law codes on Earth, and architect of a society built on justice, knowledge, power, and belief. This story will take you 4,000 years back, to a land of towering ziggurats, river cities shaped by irrigation, temples filled with music and mathematics, warriors defending empire borders, priests speaking to gods, scholars writing on clay tablets, and judges using law to protect ordinary people. You will witness how Hammurabi united warring states through diplomacy and military brilliance, how his legal vision protected widows, merchants, farmers, and workers, how Babylonian women ran businesses and shaped family culture, how slaves could earn freedom, how temples functioned like universities, hospitals, and banks, and how science, astronomy, literature, mathematics, religion, and architecture helped build a society so advanced that its ideas still echo in our modern world. This is not just a history lesson. It is the story of identity, struggle, invention, order, justice, belief, ambition, and legacy. It reveals how humanity first structured law, government, and community, how people loved, learned, worshipped, dreamed, and fought to shape their destiny. If you love ancient empires, forgotten cultures, hidden secrets, and world-changing ideas, then stay with us, because this history will not only educate you, it will transport you. It will make you see our own world differently. So sit back, open your mind, and let History Teller YT take you into the heart of Babylon, a civilization of stars, stone, science, and spirit. A civilization that still lives inside our laws, our languages, and our imagination. This is the story of Hammurabi. Let's begin. Babylonian mathematicians used a base 60 system, known today as sexagesimal mathematics. This system survives in modern timekeeping. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a full circle. Ancient scribes created multiplication charts, reciprocal tables, and area formulas. Tablets show solutions to equations involving rectangles, cylinders, and triangular fields. Students solved algebraic problems such as a field has length and width unknown. Its area is given. Find dimensions. They used algebraic logic, not guesswork. Math supported taxation and agriculture, calculating grain rations, field boundaries, harvest yields, and salaries required precise number systems. Mistakes could cause starvation or rebellion, so math was considered a sacred skill, guarded by scribes. Astronomy developed from agricultural necessity and religious curiosity. Priests and scholars observed star patterns to predict seasonal change. They created a lunisolar calendar system combining moon cycles with seasonal knowledge. Months began with the first visible crescent moon. Festivals aligned with astronomical timing. Failure to observe correct day might offend gods. Babylonian astronomers tracked Venus, Jupiter, and other visible planets. They noted retrograde motion, sunrise and sunset times, and eclipse possibilities. These records reveal surprising accuracy. Divination used astronomical data to interpret omens. Astronomers believed celestial movement reflected divine communication. Eclipses might warn of political change. Comets foreshadow great births or disasters. Although modern science separates astronomy from astrology, in Hammurabi's world, the two were inseparable because the universe was seen as a message system from gods. Mathematics also influenced trade. Merchants used standardized measures to weigh silver, grain, and wool. Cylinder seals stamped contract authenticity, functioning like notarization. Business partners trusted math to maintain fairness. Writing preserved scientific knowledge. Clay tablets recorded recipes, algorithms, star lists, and rainfall data. Even damaged fragments show structured instruction. Some tablets contain early square root approximation methods. demonstrating numerical reasoning far ahead of many later societies. Calendar science unified empire operations. Farmers worked by scheduled planting times. Priests conducted rituals by month name. Kings planned campaigns around weather. And merchants traveled when river conditions favored navigation. Through this scientific literacy, Hammurabi's empire developed stability and continuity. Knowledge did not rely on memory alone. It lived through written evidence. Education systems further supported science. Scribal schools trained elites in mathematics, grammar, history, and astronomy. Students copied scientific tablets until mastery. Their work preserved ancient discoveries across centuries. Thus, mathematics and astronomy served not as isolated intellectual hobbies, but as engines of civilization, organizing time, shaping justice, calculating economy, and connecting human experience to cosmic interpretation. Technology in Hammurabi's world also developed in unexpected directions: medicine, chemistry, metallurgy, food production, and artistic science. These fields show that Babylonian society valued practical knowledge and experimentation. Medical science blended spiritual belief with physical treatment. Physicians diagnosed illness based on visual symptoms: fever, swelling, discoloration, coughing, and pain. They prescribed treatments using plants, oils, honey, alcohol, and mineral mixtures. Clay tablets list ingredients for treating infection, broken bones, and digestive issues. Some remedies used salt and vinegar for cleaning wounds. Others used milk and herbs to ease childbirth pain. Doctors divided into two primary categories: ASU, practical physicians, and Ashipu, spiritual healers. The ASU treated physical illness using surgery or medicine, while the Ashipu recited incantations. Modern readers see conflict between science and magic, but Babylonian culture blended them, believing body and spirit remained inseparable. The Code of Hammurabi includes medical malpractice laws. If a surgeon caused death or blindness through careless operation, punishment followed. These laws encouraged professional caution and standardized quality expectation. Chemistry influenced craft production. Potters knew how to manipulate clay composition, firing temperatures, and glaze mixtures. They experimented with minerals to produce colored surfaces. Black, red, and brown glazes emerged through chemical reactions and kilns. Metalworkers mastered bronze alloy technology. Bronze required combining copper and tin at precise ratios. Too little tin produced weak metal. Too much created brittleness. Smiths melted metals in furnaces, poured molten bronze into stone molds, and hammered cooled shapes into strength. They also engraved religious inscriptions or decorative lines onto tools and weapons. Perfume makers boiled flowers, oils, and spices to produce scented products. Dye workers used crushed insects, plants, and minerals to color textiles. These processes reveal early industrial chemistry, systematic testing, measurement, and observation. Food science shaped diet and survival. Brewers developed fermentation techniques to produce beer, controlling yeast behavior. Baking required understanding dough, temperature, and timing. These industries fed cities efficiently. Navigation knowledge also existed. Merchants traveling river routes understood current flow, seasonal levels, and wind behavior. Boat building demanded carpentry skill and waterproofing knowledge using bitumen. Babylonian invention included writing tools, musical instruments, agricultural machinery, and textile equipment. Looms allowed large-scale fabric production. Reed pipes and harps demonstrated acoustic understanding. Even lawmaking represented science. Categorizing crimes, measuring compensation, and documenting evidence required structured thinking comparable to modern legal logic. Babylonian creativity reflected in art. Relief carving required geometric planning. Cylinder seal production involved microscopic engraving. Jewelry demanded precision and hand-eye coordination. Thus, Hammurabi's empire was not technologically primitive. It was a center of innovation where skilled minds experimented with materials, medicine, ritual, engineering, and mathematics. These achievements show that Babylonian civilization was built through human ingenuity, not luck. It thrived because people observed, questioned, tested, recorded, and improved. Technology helped Hammurabi lead an empire that endured in memory for millennia. Hammurabi's world did not end with his death. Instead, his legal, cultural, and political systems continued shaping history long after Babylon fell to foreign empires. The Code of Hammurabi became a foundation upon which later civilizations built legal and moral identity. It represented one of the earliest attempts to write law visibly, publicly, and permanently. Even though later cultures created new legal philosophies, Hammurabi established the idea that governments owed justice to citizens through written standards rather than arbitrary decisions. After Hammurabi's rule ended, his successors continued referencing his legacy. Some kings imitated his style of inscriptions, praising gods for granting them power to protect the weak. Babylonian scribes copied the code for centuries because it served as legal training material. Even when political control changed, when the Kassites conquered Babylon, when the Assyrians dominated Mesopotamia, when Persians rose into power, Hammurabi's laws remained respected as historical precedent. This endurance proved the code held intellectual authority beyond temporary rule. Those who succeeded entered government careers as record keepers, accountants, diplomats, judges, or royal administrators. In this way, education served the state directly. Literacy gave the empire structure. Libraries formed another essential part of intellectual life. Temples and palaces stored thousands of documents, poetic hymns, business receipts, royal letters, medical recipes, astronomical observations, and legal rulings. These records turned cities into information centers. Clay tablets preserved for centuries because baked clay resisted decay better than papyrus or leather. Thanks to this, modern scholars have recovered thousands of texts from Hammurabi's world, gaining insight into daily life unimaginable without such preservation. Education shaped identity. Literate officials gained high social respect. They were guardians of knowledge, able to interpret law and communicate with distant provinces. Their skills created bridges between cultures, enabling Hammurabi's empire to survive changes in leadership and geography. Schools also strengthened the legal code. Judges referencing Hammurabi's laws needed scribes to read and interpret them correctly. Without literacy, the code would have been symbolic ornamentation, not a functioning legal system. By training generations of scribes, Hammurabi ensured his laws lived beyond his lifetime. Writing unified the empire. Merchants traveling to Mari, Assyria, or Elam carried documents guaranteeing rights and proving identity. Marriage contracts, adoption statements, and property deeds followed precise written formats that nearly any trained scribe could recognize. Because writing preserved information objectively, memory no longer depended on rumor or oral tradition alone. Text became truth. Thus, Hammurabi's empire was not only a kingdom of warriors and builders. It was a kingdom of readers, thinkers, and historians who believed knowledge was power. The intellectual achievements of Hammurabi's Babylon extended far beyond reading and writing. Mathematics, astronomy, and medicine thrived within this culture, forming scientific traditions that influenced later civilizations. Babylonian intellectual life built upon Sumerian foundations, but added new layers of precision, practicality, and curiosity. Mathematics served many functions: land measurement, construction planning, trade calculation, and calendar design. Cuneiform tablets from Hammurabi's time show multiplication tables, division exercises, and algebraic problems. Students solved complex equations related to area and volume. Babylonian math used a base 60 numerical system, which explains why modern time measurement, 60 seconds, 60 minutes, survives from Mesopotamian heritage. This base 60 structure allowed fast calculations involving fractions, making astronomy and engineering more efficient. Irrigation planning relied on mathematics. Surveyors measured land using ropes and standardized units. They calculated canal slopes to ensure water flowed smoothly without eroding banks. Builders calculated brick numbers, arch angles, and foundation measurements. Without mathematical precision, cities would have suffered collapse or flood disaster. Astronomy was deeply tied to religion, but produced real scientific understanding. Babylonian astronomers charted star movement, identified lunar cycles, and predicted eclipses. These observations supported agricultural planning and religious festivals. Priests believed celestial patterns signaled divine messages. This worldview created early forms of scientific record-keeping. Medical knowledge under Hammurabi blended spiritual belief with practical treatment. Doctors diagnosed illness based on symptoms and experience. Clay tablets describe surgical procedures, wounds, bone setting, and herbal remedies. Honey, wine, oils, and crushed plants serve medicinal roles. Hammurabi's code addresses medical malpractice, proving that advanced operations occurred, especially eye surgery, bone repair, and internal wound treatment. Professional specialization existed. Physicians treated internal illness, while surgeons treated injuries. Barbers sometimes doubled as surgeons. Midwives offered childbirth assistance and postpartum care. Knowledge passed through apprenticeships, not formal schools, but skills remained impressive for the age. Technical expertise extended to metallurgy. Bronze weapon and tool crafting demanded mastery of melting temperatures, alloy ratios, and molding techniques. Artisans shaped axes, plows, nails, arrowheads, and luxury ornaments. Craftsmen used chemical knowledge to dye fabrics and produce perfumes. They mixed minerals to create glazes for pottery and colored bricks. Bitumen, naturally occurring asphalt, was used for waterproofing and construction, showing geological understanding. Engineering achievements included floodgates, bridges, irrigation dikes, and large warehouses. City planners understood wind patterns and sun exposure, positioning streets to maximize shade. Architects aligned temples with astronomical directions, revealing sky-based geometry knowledge. Even music exhibited mathematical precision. Musicians understood string tension ratios and scale patterns. Hymns followed structured rhythmic patterns developed from earlier Sumerian tradition. In short, Hammurabi's empire nurtured scientific thought. While their worldview tied science to religion, they still produced objective data through observation and record-keeping. Their discoveries influenced ancient Greece, Persia, and later Islamic scholarship. Without this intellectual foundation, many modern academic fields might look very different. Literature in Hammurabi's empire reflects profound emotional depth, cultural pride, and philosophical inquiry. Babylonian writers continued older Sumerian traditions while shaping a new literary identity that supported their expanding empire. Clay tablets from Hammurabi's era contain poetry, epic stories, wisdom texts, hymns, proverbs, riddles, and laments. These works expressed the values Hammurabi wanted his people to embrace: justice, loyalty, respect for the gods, and emotional endurance. Epic storytelling held enormous cultural significance. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though older than Hammurabi, circulated widely in his time. This story explored human mortality, friendship, courage, grief, and the pursuit of meaning. Its themes influenced Babylonian identity because they paralleled real political experiences. Kings sought eternal fame, cities rose and fell, and individuals struggled against destiny. Mythology connected human and divine realms. Stories about Enki, Inanna, Shamash, Ishtar, and Marduk shaped religious imagination. Mythic poetry explored creation, the flood, and cosmic battles between gods and monsters. These narratives explained natural phenomena and taught moral lessons. They also justified political power, claiming kings acted on behalf of the gods. Wisdom literature provided moral guidance. Do not speak lies, honor your parents, never betray a friend. These lines appear on clay tablets similar to proverbs in the Hebrew Bible and later Greek writings. Such ideas demonstrate cultural transmission across centuries and borders. Funeral laments expressed heartbreak over ruined cities or lost warriors. Songs mourn the death of rulers, droughts, famine, and war. These laments preserved emotional memory and strengthened communal identity by acknowledging shared suffering. Hammurabi also promoted historical writing. Royal inscriptions recorded battles, building projects, diplomatic alliances, and religious reforms. These inscriptions shaped collective identity by claiming Hammurabi was chosen king of justice. They functioned as propaganda and historical archive at the same time. Libraries preserved not only new works, but ancient classics. Palace archives stored administrative letters between Hammurabi and his governors. Many tablets contained personal correspondences revealing family problems, business negotiations, and land disputes. These documents make Babylonian voices feel alive today. Cultural identity thrived through performance. Poets recited myths in temple courtyards while musicians played harps and lyres. Theater-like rituals reenacted mythic battles during festivals. Storytelling at night markets entertained working classes. Through literature and mythology, Hammurabi crafted a shared culture strong enough to unify diverse populations. Sumerians, Akkadians, Amorites, and others found cultural belonging through shared stories and values. Thus, the intellectual life of Hammurabi's empire extended beyond law. It shaped minds, emotions, and identity. It preserved ancient wisdom while building new visions. Babylon became not only a center of economics and power, but a center of knowledge, imagination, and cultural expression. Hammurabi's empire stretched across a wide landscape, including peoples from different ethnic, linguistic, and cultural backgrounds. Although Babylon served as the political center, regional identities shaped daily life, art, religion, and language in ways that made the empire far more complex than a single Babylonian culture dominating everyone else. Hammurabi ruled over Amorites, Akkadians, Sumerians, Assyrians, Elamites, Hurrians, and others who had lived in Mesopotamia for centuries. Each community held memories of rivalry, ancient kings, lost cities, and shifting borders. Hammurabi had to balance these histories to maintain unity. The empire contained major cultural regions, each contributing its own identity. Southern Mesopotamia, originally the homeland of the Sumerians, remained rich in tradition. Cities like Ur, Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur had ancient roots dating back thousands of years before Babylon's rise. Their temples, economic systems, and legal customs influenced Hammurabi's reforms. Even though the Sumerian language was no longer commonly spoken, people continued to use Sumerian for religious rites and literary writing. This meant cultural layers overlapped. In Hammurabi's empire, one could speak Akkadian in the street, hear Sumerian hymns in temples, and read legal decrees in cuneiform script influenced by both languages. Northern Mesopotamia developed its own distinct identity. Cities such as Ashur and Nineveh were centers of trade and future imperial power. During Hammurabi's lifetime, Assyria was still subordinate, but its people tended to be more militarized, shaped by life near the mountain regions and frontier trade routes. They produced different artistic styles, used unique dialects, and cultivated social traditions distinct from southern farmers. Hammurabi respected these differences, knowing that forcing cultural assimilation would produce rebellion. Instead, he used law to unify administration while allowing ethnic traditions to continue. Western regions near Mari and along the Euphrates River mixed Amorite, Syrian, and Mesopotamian culture. People there interacted with desert nomads, long-distance merchants, and traveling musicians. Their traditions featured different clothing, music styles, and household arrangements. Trade routes through these regions shaped cultural fusion, as ideas flowed from Anatolia, Syria, and the Levant. When Hammurabi conquered Mari, he gained not only land and wealth, but the cultural prestige of controlling one of the most culturally diverse regions in the Near East. Eastern territories near Elam shared long histories of rivalry with Babylon. Elamite culture involved mountain deities, distinct forms of pottery, and non-Semitic languages. Elam and Babylon traded goods and fought wars for centuries. Hammurabi's empire absorbed some border territories, gaining access to metal deposits and mountain trade routes. These interactions reshaped identity. Border villages blended Babylonian and Elamite traditions, producing hybrid culture. Hammurabi recognized that cultural diversity could strengthen, not weaken, imperial society. He allowed local customs to continue, as long as they did not oppose Babylonian law. Temples in conquered cities retained their gods and priests. Festivals continued in traditional styles. Local languages survived in daily speech. The empire was not one voice. It was a choir of cultures coordinated by a central legal system. This multi-ethnic structure also influenced the code. Laws referenced slaves, foreign traders, adopted children, temple workers, and soldiers, showing Hammurabi understood that his empire contained varied communities with different needs. His leadership acknowledged these differences while offering a shared identity through justice. The empire became a cultural mosaic. Cities learned from one another through travel, trade, and intermarriage. Intellectual ideas crossed borders. Schools taught students about Sumerian myths, Akkadian grammar, and Amorite political tradition. We can view Hammurabi's empire as an early example of multicultural administration, diverse, layered, and connected through law rather than language or ethnicity alone. Communication across Hammurabi's empire required remarkable flexibility. People spoke multiple languages and dialects, making translation a daily necessity. Akkadian served as the administrative and scribal language, but regional speech patterns shaped daily conversation. During Hammurabi's lifetime, language reflected identity, who someone was, where they came from, and what role they played in society. The two major forms of Akkadian, Old Babylonian and Old Assyrian, coexisted within the empire. Old Babylonian became the official version spoken in courts, markets, and temples. Its widespread use connected distant regions through a shared linguistic medium. But people continued to speak as local communities always had. Sumerian remained alive in temples and schools, used to copy hymns, maintain religious tradition, and preserve literature. Students spent hours memorizing ancient Sumerian texts, even though most never spoke it in daily life. Amorite, the language of Hammurabi's own ancestry, shaped names and vocabulary, but was less visible in writing. Personal names reflect Amorite identity. Hammurabi himself bore an Amorite name meaning the kinsman is a healer. This linguistic diversity shows how Babylonian society blended old cultures into new forms. Dialect differences influenced trade. Merchants traveling across the empire negotiated prices through shared hand gestures, number systems, and scribal contracts rather than relying exclusively on speech. Tablets recorded transactions, so misunderstandings did not ruin business. Some merchants learned multiple languages to succeed, becoming early multilingual professionals. Communication across long distances required administrative discipline. The empire used messengers to deliver clay tablet letters between cities. These messengers rode donkeys or walked along the Euphrates River, carrying sealed documents stamped with cylinder seals. When delivered, scribes read messages aloud to officials or replied using fresh clay. These letter systems created fast, reliable communication compared to oral travel memory. The postal network allowed Hammurabi to monitor governors. Letters discovered from the period show Hammurabi demanding explanations for missing tax shipments, canal failures, or local corruption. Without written communication, the king would have remained blind to provincial issues. Writing allowed a ruler in Babylon to influence distant cities hundreds of miles away. Language also shaped law. Because citizens spoke different tongues, Hammurabi wrote his legal code in Akkadian, the most widely understood language among literate administrators. Had he chosen Sumerian, few common scribes could interpret it. Choosing Akkadian expanded the code's accessibility. Religious language served another purpose. Hymns often used Sumerian to invoke ancient authority. Spiritual songs traveled between cities, shaping shared emotional identity. Even if listeners did not understand every word, the rhythm and voice carried meaning. Education bridged dialect differences. Scribal students across the empire memorized identical word lists, proverbs, and historical texts. This standardized curriculum produced cultural unity. A scribe trained in Sippar could work in Nippur because both cities taught identical systems. Communication networks extended beyond writing. Oral storytelling remained central to cultural transmission. Bards memorized long poems and performed them in marketplaces, sharing stories of gods, kings, and legendary heroes. Oral memory bound the illiterate to the educated world. Thus, language diversity did not divide Hammurabi's empire, it enriched it. Babylon succeeded not by forcing everyone to speak alike, but by allowing multilingual interaction under a shared administrative script. Through scribal systems, dialect tolerance, and written communication, Hammurabi linked thousands of people across a vast territory, turning varied languages into threads woven into one cultural fabric. Hammurabi's empire existed at a crossroads where migration, trade, and cultural exchange constantly reshaped society. People moved between villages, cities, and regions for work, marriage, education, or religious pilgrimage. Hammurabi influenced the Hebrew Bible as well. Scholars have long compared Babylonian law codes with biblical laws found in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Themes involving compensation, injury law, livestock responsibility, and property rights reveal remarkable parallels. Although direct borrowing remains debated, cultural exchange between Mesopotamia and ancient Israel shaped legal tradition for thousands of years. The code also influenced Greek philosophical thought indirectly. As knowledge traveled through trade and conquest, Greeks became aware of Mesopotamian history. Ideas about justice, civic duty, and written law reached Greece through cultural memory rather than direct translation, feeding early democratic concepts. Roman law likewise carried echoes of Hammurabi's worldview. Even though Rome developed its own system, the belief that law should be written, public, and consistent mirrored Babylonian principles. The Roman 12 Tables, a famous early legal document, served a similar purpose, preventing legal manipulation by elites. Hammurabi proved that law must be transparent to prevent corruption. In Persia, under the Achaemenid Empire, kings emphasized multicultural legal unification similar to Hammurabi. They allowed conquered people to maintain traditions while following core imperial rules. This administrative philosophy resembled Hammurabi's model. Medieval Islamic scholarship preserved Mesopotamian scientific texts. Astronomical data, math tables, and herbal medicine survived through Arabic translation. Without this preservation, humanity might never have recovered some knowledge discovered in Hammurabi's world. Modern legal history respects Hammurabi for establishing intellectual structure rather than inventing morality. Hammurabi did not create ethics. Humanity already understood fairness. Instead, he organized law into a written framework that restricted power and reduced unpredictability. Such movement created social networks that expanded identity beyond birthplace. Babylonian records show that citizens routinely traveled to buy livestock, attend court, retrieve relatives, or trade goods. This human movement changed culture one conversation, one contract, and one friendship at a time. Trade routes served as cultural highways. Merchants traveling from Mari brought Syrian fabrics, clay pots, cedar wood, and musical instruments. Their presence influenced Babylonian fashion, cuisine, and entertainment. Over time, Babylonian clothing styles incorporated foreign fabric types, creating blended fashion. Jewelry styles adopted Syrian metalwork patterns, creating new trends. And foreign spices influenced Babylonian cooking traditions. Scholars traveling across regions exchanged religious ideas and mathematical knowledge. Temple scribes in Babylon shared astronomical observations with scholars from Sippar and Nippur. Religious texts copied in one city appeared in another, creating a shared literary culture. Teachers traveled to teach wealthy households or royal families. Families hired tutors from distant cities, ensuring their children learned writing and mathematics at advanced levels. Migration shaped economic roles. Farmers moved to cities seeking better wages, expanding the labor force. Craftsmen settled in new regions to sell pottery or metalwork. Shepherds moved across borders following grazing seasons. Slaves captured in wars integrated into Babylonian households, bringing languages and traditions from their homelands. Marriage between regions strengthened alliances. Women often relocated after marriage, carrying traditions to new cities. Such unions created bridges of kinship that encouraged peace rather than conflict. Religious travel had immense cultural impact. People journeyed to temples during festivals. Pilgrims exchanged prayers, songs, and rituals. They also traded stories of local miracles, creating spiritual networks across the empire. These gatherings blended cultures, unifying people through shared devotion. Military campaigns also caused population shifts. When Hammurabi conquered a region, soldiers sometimes relocated there to serve as garrisons. Their families followed, and Babylonian culture mixed with local identity. Soldiers brought Babylonian customs, but they also adopted regional belief systems, forming hybrid traditions. Foreign merchants who settled in Babylon formed ethnic neighborhoods. Archaeology suggests people from Elam lived near Babylonian dock regions, while Amorite families lived in older districts connected to trade. These communities preserved aspects of their native cultures, but also absorbed Babylonian law, food, and clothing. Because Hammurabi protected merchant rights through law, commercial trust increased, allowing strangers to trade confidently. With trust came curiosity. People from different regions learned songs, exchanged proverbs, and shared mythic stories. This exchange helped Mesopotamian mythology spread across borders, shaping cultural memory far beyond Babylon. In this multicultural world, identity evolved constantly. A farmer born in Sumerian territory might speak Akkadian, marry an Amorite woman, and sell crops to merchants from Assyria. His children would inherit multiple traditions, showing that empire life created new identities. All these cultural exchanges strengthened Hammurabi's rule. Instead of isolating communities, he encouraged interaction by protecting trade, enforcing contracts, and ensuring justice reached every city. The result was a dynamic cultural web that preserved diversity while building unity. Women in Hammurabi's Babylon lived within a structured and patriarchal society, but their status was more complex than modern stereotypes assume. While men dominated political leadership, women possessed legal rights, social influence, and economic presence that surpassed what many later civilizations allowed. Hammurabi's laws reflect this dynamic. They reveal restrictions, but also protections and opportunities. The empire functioned on the idea that every person, male or female, had a defined place in social order, and preserving that order required fairness supported by law. Women's lives depended heavily on class. Noble women enjoyed rights that common women never could. They owned property, received large dowries, commanded servants, influenced temple organizations, and even managed estates. Wealthy women ran households like businesses, supervising slaves, organizing textile production, collecting rent, and lending grain or silver. Marriage alliances involving noble women shaped diplomatic relationships between cities. Common women also participated actively in the economy. They brewed beer, baked bread, produced textiles, and sold goods at markets. Babylonian records show women renting fields, hiring laborers, and signing contracts through scribes. Many taverns were run by women, proving commercial independence existed for those willing to risk public work. Some women became midwives, healers, musicians, or professional mourners working funeral ceremonies. Female scribes were rare, but not unheard of. Surviving names suggest a small number reached elite literacy. The Code of Hammurabi recognized women as legal persons, not simply property. Married women retained ownership of their dowries, giving them financial protection in case of divorce or widowhood. If a husband died, the wife often inherited control over property until children reached adulthood. If there were no sons, daughters inherited directly. These inheritance rights prevented families from collapsing financially and allowed widows to remain socially secure. Marriage contracts structured relationships between spouses. These contracts outlined dowry value, obligations, and legal consequences for betrayal. Far from being emotional ceremonies alone, marriages were economic partnerships designed to stabilize households. A woman entering marriage with dowry assets brought power into the arrangement. However, gender inequality remained strong. Men held legal authority over wives and children. Fathers could arrange marriages without consulting daughters, especially for political alliances. Women faced harsher consequences for sexual misconduct. Adultery laws especially revealed gender bias. A married woman who willingly committed adultery risked severe punishment. Yet the law also allowed for mercy. If the husband forgave her, the courts spared her. And importantly, if adultery accusations were false, the man faced punishment. Women could initiate divorce under specific circumstances. Cruelty, abandonment, and neglect qualified. If a husband failed to provide for his wife, she could legally leave and take her dowry. This is remarkable. Many later societies denied women such rights. Babylonian society believed the marital relationship required commitment from both partners, not just obedience from wives. Another striking feature is protection for mothers. Pregnant women and nursing mothers held special legal status. Causing injury to them required heavy fines and sometimes death, especially if miscarriage occurred. Babylonian law acknowledged female biological risk and defended it through legal severity. Temple life offered alternative paths. Priestesses served as religious leaders, property managers, and ritual specialists. They controlled temple estates, signed contracts, and sometimes remained unmarried by choice or ritual obligation. While temple women lived under restrictions, they enjoyed honor and stable resources. Thus, Hammurabi's Babylon placed women beneath men politically, yet granted them social power and economic identity that was unusual for the ancient world. They were workers, landowners, wives, priestesses, mothers, and cultural conduits shaping identity across generations. Babylonian society revolved around family life. The household formed the smallest but most stable political and economic unit in the empire. Hammurabi's laws focused deeply on family structure, marriage, adoption, inheritance, child rights, marital loyalty, and household order. Without these family laws, Hammurabi's government might have failed to unify his diverse population. Marriage customs began long before ceremonies. Families negotiated union terms through scribes. These contracts recorded dowry items, expected behavior, and responsibilities. If a husband married into a wealthy family, conditions might require him to treat his wife generously. If a man married a woman from lower class, her dowry could elevate her status. Dowry represented financial identity. It guaranteed economic survival in case of separation. Because dowries remained a woman's property, husbands could not legally seize them. This meant wives held personal wealth, a significant source of independence. Polygamy existed, though not common among the poor. Most men could not afford more than one spouse. Wealthier men sometimes took secondary wives or concubines, usually for childbearing. Law provided protection for first wives in these arrangements. If a husband married again, he could not treat his first wife as a servant. Respect for family hierarchy remained essential. Adoption played an important role. Childless couples adopted children, often boys, to secure future inheritance and property care. Adoption contracts protected rights and obligations. If adopted children mistreated parents, adoption could be legally revoked. This shows relationships depended on loyalty, not only blood. Households included extended relatives. Grandparents, siblings, and cousins might share living space. Elderly parents expected support from children. If a child refused assistance, law punished them. This reflected the belief that family loyalty built social stability. Gender division influenced daily tasks. Men handled external labor, farming, trade, or administration, while women maintained home production. Yet roles were flexible. Some women worked side by side with husbands on farms or workshops. Babylonian parents valued education. Boys destined to become scribes studied at schools. Boys in farming households learned irrigation and fieldwork. Girls learned weaving, childcare, food preparation, and household accounting. Education focused on survival skills, not abstract theory. Childbirth carried emotional significance. Families prayed to goddesses like Gula for protection. Because childbirth was risky, women held sacred authority during pregnancy. If injury caused miscarriage, laws imposed severe punishment, suggesting strong moral concern for unborn life. Children also had legal status. They inherited property and received protection against abuse. Fathers held disciplinary authority, but if punishment became extreme, neighbors could intervene. Family religion centered on household gods known as lamassu, or protective spirits. Families kept small shrines at home and burned incense for blessings. These practices strengthened emotional bonds between generations. Thus, families under Hammurabi were governed by law, guided by religion, and supported by social expectation. Family stability translated into political stability. Hammurabi's empire survived because it rested not only on military power, but on strong, protected family structures. Women contributed to Babylonian society beyond domestic life. They worked in temples, businesses, farms, markets, and artisan workshops. Their labor fueled the economy just as much as men's. Understanding women's roles reveals how complex and balanced Hammurabi's society actually was. Weaving ranked among the most important industries. Women spun wool into thread and produced textiles used for clothing, bags, blankets, and trade goods. Textile work was so essential that large workshops existed employing dozens of women. Records show temple complexes hiring women as full-time textile producers. Wages came in grain rations or silver. This industry generated massive export income. Women brewed and sold beer, a core Babylonian commodity. Brewing required knowledge of fermentation, ingredient measurement, and sanitation. The code addressed tavern regulations, showing that women tavern keepers held legal responsibility to maintain honest scales and avoid harboring criminals. Some tavern owners became wealthy, demonstrating female entrepreneurial potential. On farms, women planted crops, cared for livestock, and managed food storage. In rural families, women plowed fields, cleaned irrigation channels, and harvested barley. Their physical contribution equaled men's effort. Women also held sacred roles. Priestesses served goddesses in temples, oversaw food distribution, managed finances, and organized rituals. These women influenced spiritual life and preserved oral tradition. Their responsibilities required literacy, discipline, and leadership. Female healers existed as herbal specialists or midwives. They delivered babies, treated wounds, and passed medical wisdom through generations. Mothers taught daughters medical recipes, knowledge that ensured family survival. Some women held unusually powerful positions. In rare cases, high priestesses supervised temple estates larger than some royal lands. They controlled workers, animals, agricultural fields, and stored wealth. Their influence rivaled noblemen. Legal protection strengthened women's economic authority. If a husband wasted family assets, law allowed a wife to intervene. She could file complaints to judges and safeguard property for children. Wives managed household budgets and ration storage. Women enslaved through debt or war also received legal consideration. They could earn freedom through labor or payment. If masters harmed enslaved women unlawfully, the law punished offenders. This system did not create equality, but but it limited cruelty. Women participated in festivals, poetry recitation, and funerary rituals. They sang laments honoring ancestors, creating cultural continuity. Their voices preserved emotional memory and moral teaching. Despite these strengths, women faced significant barriers. They rarely served as scribes or judges. They had limited political power. Sexual double standards remained strong. Violence in marriage was not always punished equally. Yet when compared to later societies, such as classical Greece or early Rome, Babylonian women possessed more economic independence and legal identity. Hammurabi's laws acknowledged female humanity by granting them agency, property rights, and contractual authority. Their work built Babylon, literally and culturally. Women were not silent in this world. They were active shapers of empire life. Their labor fed cities, clothed soldiers, enriched temples, and raised new generations of citizens who carried Babylonian culture into the future. The society of Hammurabi's Babylon was based on a layered social hierarchy that shaped identity, rights, responsibilities, and economic roles. Babylonian culture did not imagine society as a flat system of equal individuals. Instead, it accepted inequality as natural, believing that social rank reflected divine order. People were divided into categories with varying privileges and obligations, and Hammurabi's law code clearly recognized these distinctions. The law did not pretend everyone lived under identical conditions. It addressed people based on their social class, ensuring rules applied realistically within the world they understood. At the top of the hierarchy were nobles, individuals called a whilom in Akkadian. These men and women were usually landowners, wealthy merchants, military leaders, high-ranking scribes, and temple priests. Nobles had access to prestige, political influence, elaborate homes, and larger legal protection. For example, if a noble lost an eye to violence, the attacker lost an eye in return. If a noble faced false accusation, the penalty was severe, protecting their honor. Nobles also carried more responsibility. They paid higher taxes, provided military resources, sponsored festivals, and funded temple construction. Their reputation functioned like currency, shaping their standing in society. Commoners formed the next major social group, referred to as mushkinim. These people made up the largest population segment. They included farmers, laborers, soldiers, artisans, metalworkers, shepherds, scribes in training, and small merchants. While they lacked aristocratic privilege, they were not powerless. Many owned land or rented fields, controlled local trade, and maintained households with property rights. The law protected commoners against exploitation. Nobles who harmed them faced financial penalties. Although punishments differed depending on rank, Hammurabi's code still acknowledged commoners as respectable members of society, essential to the empire's functioning. Below commoners came a group often misunderstood by modern readers, dependent laborers, sometimes called clients or semi-free workers. These people worked on estates, inside temples, or for wealthy landlords. They were not slaves, since they received rations, wages, or land access. Some rented land to support families. While their freedom was limited, they could negotiate work conditions and, at times, rise to higher status through service or marriage. Finally, slaves formed the lowest layer of society, but Babylonian slavery was not identical to later forms found in Greece, Rome, or the Atlantic world. Mesopotamian slavery rarely depended exclusively on race or ethnicity. Instead, slavery emerged from war, crime, debt, or birth into enslaved households. Some slaves served nobles inside homes. Others worked fields, and many worked temple estates. Some were skilled, scribes, craftsmen, accountants, and earned wages or savings. Babylonian slavery did not always mean a lifetime condition. Many slaves gained freedom through contracts, purchase, or the 3-year debt service rule. Class differences also shaped punishments. When a noble injured a noble, the punishment was direct physical retaliation, an eye for an eye. But if a noble injured a commoner, Financial compensation replaced mutilation. Slaves received different treatment still. If someone damaged a slave belonging to another, they paid half the slave's value. These rules show a structured social order, not blind brutality. Hammurabi wanted stability, not chaos. Punishing nobles too lightly or slaves too severely might create social imbalance. Despite hierarchy, movement between classes was possible. A slave who purchased freedom could become a commoner. A loyal soldier could rise to noble status. A successful merchant could buy land and gain prestige. Hammurabi's world allowed ambition, even if challenges remained significant. Social rank influenced marriage. Nobles married within their class to protect wealth. Commoners sometimes married upward through dowry arrangements. Slaves could marry free people, though children inherited mixed status depending on contracts. This hierarchy shaped identity deeply. A noble child grew up trained for leadership. A common child learned farming or metalwork. A slave child inherited labor from parents. Yet every level of society existed under Hammurabi's law, proving the king's greatest achievement, unifying an unequal population under shared justice. Beyond legal legacy, Hammurabi shaped concepts of kingship. His stele depicts him before Shamash, receiving divine authority to enforce justice. This visual message influenced later art. Egyptian pharaohs, Persian kings, and European monarchs represented themselves as chosen protectors of moral order. Archaeologists rediscovered Hammurabi's code in 1901 in Susa, where it had been taken by Elamite conquerors. Its discovery electrified the academic world. Translators revealed laws that seemed both alien and surprisingly familiar. Modern people saw themselves reflected in ancient disputes over wages, property, inheritance, and marriage. The code challenged assumptions about so-called primitive societies. Instead of chaotic brutality, Hammurabi's Babylon proved organized, literate, rational, and deeply thoughtful. It became clear that ancient civilizations surpassed modern expectations of complexity. Today, Hammurabi stands symbolically beside ancient lawmakers like Solon, Justinian, and Moses, architects of justice who changed how humanity understood social responsibility. His code invites modern societies to consider law not merely as punishment, but as cultural protection, moral memory, and shared identity. For nearly 3,000 years, Babylon and its stories lay buried beneath layers of soil and drifting sand. The ruins of Hammurabi's world remained hidden until archaeology transformed silent ground into living knowledge. The rediscovery of Babylon was not random luck. It was a scientific adventure fueled by curiosity and human determination to understand ancient origins. Archaeology in Mesopotamia began seriously in the 19th century. European explorers searching for biblical cities realized the Tigris-Euphrates region held immense untouched history. Excavations in places like Ur, Nippur, Nineveh, Sippar, and Babylon revealed tablets, pottery, temple foundations, palace walls, and burial sites. Each discovery rewrote pieces of history. Slavery in Hammurabi's empire must be understood in the context of ancient Near Eastern life, not as a simple moral failure, but as an economic and legal reality shaped by survival needs, warfare, family collapse, and debt repayment systems. While slavery undeniably involved inequality and hardship, Babylonian laws regulated it to limit abuse and to create potential pathways to freedom. Slaves entered bondage through several routes. The most common form was debt slavery, when poor individuals could not repay loans, or their children temporarily entered servitude to satisfy creditors. According to Hammurabi's code, such bondage ended after 3 years. This rule prevented generational slavery. Instead of destroying a family's future, the law allowed people to recover financially. War slaves formed a different category. Hammurabi's military victories produced prisoners who entered Babylonian households or temple estates. These individuals, unlike debt slaves, were often foreign-born and had fewer legal protections. They served as field laborers, builders, or domestics. However, Babylonian culture accepted integration. Foreign slaves could adopt local customs, participate in household worship, and eventually gain partial freedoms. Born slaves made up the third major group. Children born to enslaved parents became property of their masters unless manumission, freedom release, occurred. Yet these children sometimes grew up close to household members, establishing emotional bonds. Babylonian documents describe owners raising slave children with affection, later granting freedom as part of inheritance instructions. Slaves performed diverse tasks. Some worked in fields herding sheep or plowing barley. Others cleaned homes, cooked meals, washed laundry, cared for animals, or raised children. Skilled slaves played musical instruments during rituals, worked as scribes, baked temple bread, brewed beer, or managed accounts. These skilled individuals formed the backbone of Babylon's labor economy. Yet slavery, even under legal protection, remained limiting. Slaves could not freely choose marriage partners unless permitted. Their bodies belonged legally to their owners. If abused physically, their only recourse lay in compensation fines paid to owners, not directly to them. Still, Hammurabi's code included boundaries. If a man struck another slave, he paid damages. If a slave died through neglect, owners suffered losses. If a slave married a free person, their children could inherit rights. Such laws humanized slaves somewhat, preventing absolute exploitation. Slaves also appeared in temple settings. Temples functioned like economic corporations, employing enslaved workers to maintain estates, produce textiles, and harvest crops. These temple slaves received rations of grain, oil, and beer, and sometimes lived in structured communities. Freedom could be earned through loyalty or purchase. Some slaves managed to accumulate savings from small wages, then buy freedom. Others received manumission once old age approached, relieving masters of responsibility. Many freed slaves remained clients of former owners, entering semi-independent roles. Legal identity mattered. Slaves often carried clay, identity tags, or seals indicating ownership. This protected them from kidnapping, since slave theft was a serious crime. If someone hid a runaway slave, law punished them severely, proving the economic value placed on enslaved labor. Nevertheless, slavery never defined Babylonian identity completely. Most people in the empire were free. Slavery functioned not as dominant cultural identity, but as supporting labor structure embedded inside mixed social systems. Modern scholars debate the moral dimensions of Babylonian slavery. Some claim Hammurabi's code protected slaves unusually well for its age. Others argue that laws prioritized owners instead. But one truth stands clear. Hammurabi acknowledged slavery openly, regulated it carefully, and prevented its spread into endless generational bondage. This regulation, even imperfect, distinguished Babylonian slavery from later brutal systems. To modern thinkers, Hammurabi's social system may appear contradictory. It embraced inequality, yet enforced fairness. It separated society into classes, yet prevented exploitation. It accepted slavery, yet placed limits on cruelty and duration. Understanding this paradox requires exploring Hammurabi's deepest economic, political, and moral motivations. First, social inequality provided structure. Babylonian society relied on different skill levels. Nobles led armies and government offices. Commoners farmed and built infrastructure. Artisans produced goods, and slaves supported labor shortages. Without hierarchy, Babylon would have collapsed into disorganized chaos. Hammurabi believed every person served a divine role, and law reinforced that identity. Second, Hammurabi needed social cooperation more than enforced terror. If nobles bullied commoners freely, farmers would stop producing grain, soldiers would abandon battlefields, and artisans would flee cities. By protecting lower-class individuals through compensation laws, Hammurabi kept the empire functioning smoothly. Laws, such as canceling debt during natural disaster, show compassion balanced with authority. Third, regulating slavery allowed the economy to survive during crisis without destroying families permanently. Debt slavery offered temporary relief rather than permanent ruin. This system prevented mass starvation and reduced rebellion risk. Fourth, Hammurabi wanted fame as a just ruler. His code repeatedly states his mission: to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. Although inequality existed, Hammurabi believed his system reduced suffering rather than increased it. Fifth, law created psychological control. When people saw justice, they obeyed willingly. Fear of divine and civic consequence encouraged loyalty. Hammurabi knew moral conviction could hold society together better than force alone. Sixth, class-based punishment prevented retaliatory cycles. If a noble injured a commoner, harm was not repaid eye for eye, but through financial penalty. This prevented nobles from losing limbs constantly, reducing destruction at the highest levels of leadership. It was strategic, not cruel. Seventh, Hammurabi carefully blended hierarchy and mobility. Allowing slaves to win freedom encouraged productivity. Allowing commoners to become wealthy encouraged ambition. This balance created dynamic economy rather than static oppression. Lastly, inequality was rooted in religious worldview. Gods organized the universe into layers: heavens above, waters below, spirits between. Human society mirrored cosmic structure. Hammurabi could not imagine a world of identical citizens. Hierarchy reflected sacred truth. When we examine the code, not through modern ethics, but through ancient necessity, Hammurabi becomes revolutionary. His laws did not erase inequality, but they shaped a predictable, structured, and balanced world where nearly every person had legal identity and some measure of justice. His empire survived not because he ruled with brutality alone, but because he ruled with controlled inequality guided by organization, awareness, and law. To understand why the Code of Hammurabi remains one of history's most influential legal documents, we must look deeper into how the ancient Babylonians understood crime and justice. For Hammurabi, crime was not simply a violation of individual rights. It was an offense against the gods, the state, and the social order. In his worldview, crime damaged the invisible threads holding society together. If a man stole from his neighbor, he did not just harm that neighbor, he threatened the stability of the kingdom. Punishments were therefore designed not only to correct behavior or make victims whole, but also to restore cosmic balance. Hammurabi inherited traditions from earlier Sumerian rulers, but he strengthened legal systems by expanding clarity and uniformity. Before him, justice varied from one city to another. A thief in Ur might receive a different punishment from a thief in Babylon because local custom determined outcomes. Hammurabi eliminated this confusion by introducing standardized laws, ensuring that citizens across the empire faced similar consequences for similar crimes. This sense of predictability gave people confidence in law rather than personal vengeance. The code reveals a society deeply aware of the many forms crime could take: theft, murder, adultery, fraud, negligence, medical malpractice, building failure, assault, slander, corruption, witchcraft, and kidnapping all appear as defined legal categories. Hammurabi did not imagine crime as primarily emotional or psychological. He imagined it as concrete action producing measurable harm. Even accidental damage was treated seriously because negligence endangered society. Collective responsibility shaped Babylonian crime enforcement. Family members could be held accountable for one another in specific circumstances. For example, if a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner's son, the builder's son could be executed in his place. Modern readers see this punishment as unjust, yet to Hammurabi it reflected fairness. The builder, by negligence, destroyed someone's family line. Therefore, his own family line suffered equal harm. The idea of social equilibrium, a crime balanced by equivalent consequence, created legal symmetry. People believed that equality under punishment represented universal fairness. This was not vengeance in modern psychological terms, but a mathematical approach to ethics. It treated crime as imbalance demanding correction. The Babylonian worldview also saw crime through economic lenses. If a merchant defrauded a buyer, the entire trade network suffered distrust. If irrigation workers neglected duties, fields nourished fewer crops. Because Babylon relied on complex, shared systems, even small crimes caused tremendous damage. Thus, Hammurabi treated professional negligence as criminal rather than simply unfortunate error. Fear of supernatural consequence strengthened cooperation. Ordinary Babylonians believed the gods watched all actions. Violating the code risked earthly and otherworldly punishment. People swore legal oaths invoking divine wrath, believing lies would bring illness or death. This belief system reduced perjury and encouraged honest trade. Crime was also political. Hammurabi saw justice as proof of kingship effectiveness. Kings who allowed injustice lost divine favor, risking famine or war. Therefore, punishing crime became a form of leadership advertisement. When people saw the wicked punished, they believed Hammurabi protected them. One key feature of Hammurabi's thinking was prevention. Many punishments were so severe not because Hammurabi enjoyed cruelty, but because he believed fear could stop crime before it occurred. If people knew execution awaited thieves, perhaps fewer thefts would happen. Without prisons or police departments, society required rapid deterrence. Therefore, Hammurabi's view of crime reveals a society fighting against chaos using strict legal definitions and severe consequences. Through law, Hammurabi transformed crime into controlled outcomes, shaping an empire where order, responsibility, and power combined into a stable social framework. Punishment under Hammurabi's code reveals a complex legal philosophy rooted in fairness, balance, and cultural belief. Instead of punishing randomly, Hammurabi built a structured system that combined physical, financial, social, and religious consequences. The severity of punishment depended on intent, social class, damage caused, and moral expectation. The most famous legal principle associated with Hammurabi is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Known as lex talionis, this principle appears harsh, yet historians argue it prevented blood feuds and limited escalation. Before written law, victims sometimes sought extreme retaliation. If someone lost a finger, they might respond by killing their attacker and entire family. Hammurabi restricted this chaos. By defining equal punishment, he protected society from spiraling violence. Physical punishments included execution, mutilation, and corporal discipline. Crimes like robbery, witchcraft, and temple theft often resulted in death. Builders responsible for house collapse that killed owners faced execution. Doctors whose surgeries caused wrongful death risked mutilation. These punishments expressed accountability within professional fields. They were warnings. If you take a life, your life might be taken in return. However, not all crimes receive physical punishment. Financial compensation played enormous roles. If someone damaged another person's property, they repaid the value, sometimes double or triple. Compensation ensured victims did not fall into poverty because of harm. This system protected both wealthy and poor. Exile existed as a punishment in particular situations. Removing offenders from cities prevented further conflict. This was especially used for family abuse or repeated offenses. Some punishments targeted reputation. Criminals could be publicly shamed, lowering their social status permanently. In a society based on honor, reputation was currency. Losing it meant losing opportunity forever. Punishment severity reflected social rank. If a noble harmed another noble, physical retaliation was equal. If a noble harmed a commoner, payment replaced mutilation. If a commoner struck a noble, serious physical punishment followed. This system may seem biased today, but its intent was stability, not oppression. Hammurabi recognized that injuring elites threatened political structure, so greater protection surrounded them. Religious offenses were punished harshly. Theft from temples violated divine order, so execution often followed. Perjury in sacred spaces risked death. Sacrilege brought social outrage and severe legal consequence. Family crimes also drew strict attention. Adultery could lead to execution if proven. However, mercy existed. If the wronged spouse forgave guilt, the law allowed pardon. This reflects humanity, not totalitarian rule. Punishment also protected the weak. If a wealthy man physically harmed a poor laborer, he paid compensation based on value of injury. If a master killed a slave unlawfully, punishment followed. Though biased, these rules provided safety nets for vulnerable people. Hammurabi did not rely solely on punishment to create justice. He combined deterrence with economic fairness. In theft cases, execution reduced crime rates dramatically. Records show robbery was dangerous to attempt. Yet compensation laws for accidental damage helped maintain peace. Criminal procedure involved investigation, witness testimony, contract review, and oath-taking. The river ordeal served as a final option when evidence was lacking. This ritual placed judgment in divine hands. If the accused survived the river, innocence was declared. Many modern readers misunderstand this ordeal, assuming cruelty. However, it functioned as last resort to prevent wrongful punishment from human error. Ultimately, Hammurabi's punishments served three purposes: protect the community from harm, restore balance through equivalent consequence, support political and religious authority. Today, we may read these punishments as severe, yet in their historical setting, they represented the most controlled and predictable justice system ever attempted in the ancient world. While Hammurabi's punishments appear brutal to modern eyes, the deeper philosophy beneath them shows surprising complexity and moral reasoning. His code introduced ethical principles still present in modern law: fairness, accountability, transparency, and protection for the vulnerable. The harsh outer layer hid an inner logic grounded in social harmony and compassion. The prologue to Hammurabi's code claims the gods chose the king to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. This phrase reveals the moral foundation of his legal world. Hammurabi imagined law as a barrier between exploitation and survival. Without this barrier, wealthy elites could steal land, enslave debtors permanently, or escape responsibility entirely. Instead, the code placed strict limits on power. Judges who issued corrupt verdicts faced exile and fines. Merchants who defrauded customers risked death. Builders, doctors, and shepherds carried responsibility for their work. These rules reflected ethical governance rather than simply punishment for its own sake. Mercy existed within Hammurabi's world. Debt cancellation during natural disaster protected farmers from permanent ruin. Adoption laws created new families for abandoned children. Divorce rights gave mistreated wives protection. Even punitive laws sometimes included escape clauses. For example, in adultery cases, if the husband forgave the wife, the state withdrew punishment. If a river ordeal proved innocence, accusations vanished. Ethical thinking extended to unborn children. Laws punished injury, causing miscarriage more severely than economic offenses. This reveals a cultural belief in future generations as sacred. Hammurabi also believed rulers owed moral responsibility to citizens. His letters to governors show constant attention to justice. He ordered investigations into corruption and protected widows from illegal taxation. This was not a distant tyrant ignoring common people. He intervened frequently to defend them. The existence of written law itself represented ethical progress. Before Hammurabi, judges used personal opinion. Written law limited bias. Citizens knew expected outcomes. Predictable punishment reduced fear, making society feel safer. Hammurabi also imagined equality under divine justice. Although class distinctions shaped punishment type, each social group had rights. A noble, a commoner, and a slave all had access to some form of legal defense. No one lived outside legal identity. Babylonian ethics also argued that justice must be public. Law placed on stone allowed citizens to confront judges. Anyone could ask whether a verdict matched written expectations. Public law preached accountability. Religion infused ethics with emotion. Because people believed gods enforced morality, justice became spiritual commitment rather than simple civic behavior. Fear of divine punishment discouraged dishonesty more effectively than human policing alone. Yet severity remained necessary. Without powerful deterrents, Babylon, lacking prisons, organized police, or surveillance, would collapse under theft, violence, and corruption. Hammurabi calculated that harsh punishment saved lives. In a world where famine and war constantly threatened survival, crime prevention required intensity. The most famous discovery tied directly to Hammurabi occurred in 1901, when French archaeologists digging in Susa uncovered a tall black basalt stele covered with cuneiform writing. Scholars quickly realized they had found Hammurabi's code, preserved almost entirely intact. Its recovery allowed historians to hear Hammurabi's voice across 4 millennia. The stele displayed 282 laws describing contracts, medicine, trade, marriage, and punishment. Suddenly, people understood Babylonian law with shocking clarity. Archaeologists later uncovered administrative tablets that described Hammurabi's reign from daily perspectives, receipts, inventories, and letters between officials. These documents revealed life far beyond royal propaganda. We learned that Hammurabi wrote to canal supervisors about repair delays, demanded explanations from governors accused of corruption, and inspected grain shortages. Archaeology therefore expanded Hammurabi from symbolic king into working ruler. Ruins of palaces and temples illustrated architectural sophistication. Foundations revealed courtyards, thick walls, and drainage channels. Clay figurines and cylinder seals captured artistic imagination. Irrigation channels illustrated engineering precision. Archaeological discovery also challenged stereotypes. Many assumed ancient Babylon was full of immorality or chaos, shaped by misunderstanding biblical references. Excavations showed opposite truth. Babylon was orderly, structured, literate, and technologically advanced. Thousands of tablets prove the existence of thriving schools, court systems, and commercial industries. The city of Babylon itself came back to life through maps and reconstructions. Archaeologists identified the Ishtar Gate, processional way, the palace complex, and temple structures. They uncovered walls rising from dust, confirming ancient descriptions. Therefore, Hammurabi's code represents ethical evolution, the shift from clan revenge to state law, from oral tradition to written system, and from arbitrary leadership to structured justice. Hammurabi imagined a civilization where moral order replaced chaos, where law replaced vengeance, and where society functioned not through fear alone, but through shared belief in fairness. His punishments were harsh because his goals were ambitious, building peace in a world where peace never came easily. Although Hammurabi is remembered as a conqueror and lawgiver, one of his most underrated strengths was diplomacy. Long before he turned to major military campaigns, Hammurabi spent years cultivating alliances, correspondence channels, treaty agreements, and international relationships that helped shape his rise to power. This diplomatic world reveals how Babylon functioned as a political center, drawing foreign states into its sphere through negotiation, shared trade, marriage alliances, and written trust rather than violence alone. Hammurabi inherited a Babylon that was not yet the dominant force in Mesopotamia. Rival kingdoms surrounded him: Larsa in the south, Eshnunna in the northeast, Mari to the northwest, Assyria beyond northern borders, and Elam near the Zagros foothills. Navigating these regions required more than military readiness. Hammurabi used diplomacy to create time to build canals, strengthen economic power, gather loyal armies, and prepare the people for eventual wars. Letters discovered in ancient archives show that diplomacy in Hammurabi's era relied heavily on scribal communication. Rulers exchanged clay tablets through messengers traveling along rivers or roads. Each letter carried formal language, respectful greetings, and discussion of trade, conflict, and alliance obligations. These letters reveal Hammurabi as a sharp negotiator. In many cases, he promised friendship and trade to one kingdom while secretly preparing military action against another. He used words to position Babylon advantageously before drawing swords. One of Hammurabi's earliest alliances formed with Zimri-Lim, king of Mari. Mari was a wealthy city controlling strategic trade routes along the Euphrates. By securing an alliance with Zimri-Lim, Hammurabi gained diplomatic access to Syrian markets, caravans, and military help. In return, he provided Mari agricultural stability, shared political intelligence, and mutual protection. This partnership proved essential during battles against Eshnunna and Larsa. Letters between the two kings show warm greetings, gifts exchanged, and personal cooperation. Hammurabi knew that building trust strengthened future victories. Diplomacy also involved managing cultural borders. Regions differed in religion, language, and law. Hammurabi respected these differences by acknowledging local gods and welcoming foreign ideas into Babylonian culture. For instance, trade treaties often referenced multiple deities, so neither side felt spiritually insulted. Even when planning to conquer Larsa, Hammurabi invoked its patron gods respectfully to reduce resistance and present conquest as salvation rather than eradication. Hammurabi's diplomacy extended into trade control. Babylon wanted access to metals from the east, timber from the north, and stone from mountain regions. Controlling these imports required peaceful relationships as much as battlefield success. Hammurabi negotiated safe passage routes, tariff agreements, and price conditions. He understood that war could destroy economic chains, while diplomacy preserved prosperity. Marriage alliances also shaped diplomacy. Royal daughters and sisters sometimes married foreign rulers to secure peace. These marriages created personal loyalty that often prevented conflict, at least temporarily. Through marriage alliances, Hammurabi extended influence into smaller city-states eager for Babylonian support. Diplomacy helped shape political propaganda. When Babylon gained territory through alliance rather than war, Hammurabi advertised it as a peaceful unification of people under justice. This moral language increased his legitimacy and made conquered populations less resistant. Thus, Hammurabi's diplomatic strategy reveals empire building through patience, psychology, and persuasion. Violence alone never won Mesopotamia. Words, agreements, promises, and relationships built the foundation upon which his battlefield triumphs rested. Babylon, under Hammurabi, waged war strategically rather than recklessly. His armies did not simply rush into combat. They planned campaigns around terrain, weather, river routes, supply availability, morale management, and information networks. Understanding these details reveals how Babylon defeated kingdoms larger and older than itself. Military intelligence served as Hammurabi's secret weapon. Scouts traveled ahead of the main army, reporting enemy movements, terrain conditions, and water supplies. Traders, shepherds, and caravan drivers often acted as informants, sharing rumors or descriptions of rival forces. Many spies disguised themselves as merchants or travelers, infiltrating enemy cities and gathering information from taverns or markets. With accurate intelligence, Hammurabi chose the perfect moment to strike. He waited when enemies suffered internal rebellions or shortage of food, allowing Babylon to win battles without excessive bloodshed. Strategic timing defined his victories. Hammurabi often launched military operations during seasons when rivers flooded or when enemies were least prepared. For example, he used river control to isolate cities, cutting irrigation water to weaken food production. Starvation and thirst broke morale before soldiers ever breached city walls. His strategy demonstrated mastery of environmental warfare, turning geography into weapon. Babylonian troops fought in organized units. Infantry, archers, charioteers, slingers, and auxiliary troops. These formations responded to enemy tactics flexibly. Archers provided long-distance attack, softening enemy lines. Infantry charged once formations weakened. Slingers attacked from behind cover, throwing stones with deadly accuracy. Chariots flanked and disrupted. This multi-layered approach allowed Babylonian forces to overcome armies relying solely on infantry. Siege warfare was significant. Babylonians used rams to break gates, dug trenches to undermine walls, and built ramps to scale them. They blocked rivers feeding enemy canals, forcing cities to surrender. Siege warfare required patience, discipline, and engineering. Soldiers lived in camps outside city walls for months. Supply lines kept them fed, and rotating camps prevented disease. Psychological warfare mattered too. Before battle, Hammurabi sometimes sent letters to rival kings, offering peace under Babylonian protection. These letters tested enemy resolve. Weak rulers surrendered without fighting. Others attempted to negotiate while their soldiers panicked. Hammurabi spread fear not only through weaponry, but through reputation. Stories of unstoppable Babylonian victories discouraged resistance. Training ensured battlefield success. Soldiers practiced formation marching, shield locking, javelin throwing, and chariot maneuvering. Discipline reduced chaos under pressure. Babylonian armies fought as coordinated machines rather than chaotic mobs. Weapons also mattered. Archers wielded composite bows with horn and sinew reinforcement. Axes and spears used bronze blades, capable of piercing leather armor. Royal smiths sharpened blades and carved inscriptions on weapons, invoking protection from gods. Soldiers carried amulets, believing they channeled divine favor. Psychological belief, combined with material preparation, strengthened battlefield courage. Finally, Hammurabi rewarded warriors. Successful soldiers gained land grants, tax reductions, or public honor. These rewards encouraged loyalty and bravery. Unlike some kings who treated soldiers as expendable, Hammurabi treated the army as investment. Thus, Hammurabi's success rested not on brute force alone, but on military intelligence networks, tactical diversity, battlefield engineering, morale systems, and strategic timing that reshaped Mesopotamian warfare forever. Conquest never ended with battlefield victory. After capturing new territories, Hammurabi needed to transform defeated enemies into functioning parts of his empire. Without careful post-war planning, rebellion would have destroyed Babylonian control. Hammurabi therefore developed systems that preserved order, encouraged loyalty, and sustained administrative continuity. First came political restructuring. Instead of completely destroying former governments, Babylon installed local governors under direct royal supervision. These governors understood regional culture, allowing smoother integration. Loyalty was enforced through legal accountability, messenger surveillance, and ritual oath-taking. Next came legal unification. Conquered people were required to follow Hammurabi's code, not to erase local customs, but to create shared justice standards. This reduced conflict between cities. Citizens knew that contracts, punishments, and marriage agreements worked similarly everywhere. Law became glue binding diverse lands. Religious tolerance strengthened unity. Hammurabi allowed conquered cities to keep their temples and gods. Priests continued rituals uninterrupted. Babylon simply incorporated local deities into a larger pantheon led by Marduk. This strategy prevented religious uprising, something many later conquerors failed to understand. Economic reorganization followed. Conquered lands provided taxes, agricultural labor, and trade routes. Farmers continued their work with minimal disruption. Hammurabi ensured irrigation remained functional, because canal destruction would starve both conqueror and conquered. Babylon invested in rebuilding canals, proving conquest brought improvement, not ruin. Social policy encouraged identity blending. Soldiers stationed in conquered regions married local women. Trade between cities increased. Cultural festivals traveled across the empire. Within a generation, conquered youth spoke Akkadian and participated in Babylonian legal culture. Integration replaced resistance. Diplomacy continued even after conquest. Hammurabi wrote to leaders in distant lands, promising peaceful relations and trade partnerships. Former enemies often became allies once they recognized Babylon offered stability. Foreign merchants enjoyed legal protection. If someone harmed a foreign trader, the law demanded compensation. This encouraged travel and enriched the empire. Hammurabi understood economic openness maintained peace better than violence. Trade success convinced cities they benefited under Babylon rather than risking independence. Conquered elites received opportunity within the empire. Some joined Babylon's bureaucracy or army. Their advancement reduced desire for rebellion. Even education supported integration. Scribal schools taught children from many regions uniform writing systems, mathematics, and cultural values. These shared skills helped create a new imperial identity. Through all these methods, Hammurabi built unity not through oppression, but through structure. His empire lasted because it functioned as a layered collaboration between conqueror and conquered. Babylon did not simply absorb people. It reshaped them into citizens who believed they belonged to something larger. To understand Hammurabi's world, one must understand his gods. Babylon was not simply a military or legal empire. It was a vast spiritual ecosystem structured around divine identity, mythological lineage, and a worldview in which humans, gods, spirits, and cosmic forces interacted constantly. Religion shaped daily routine. Household customs, court rulings, political propaganda, marriage expectations, funeral rites, and agricultural faith. Without grasping Babylonian spirituality, Hammurabi's accomplishments cannot be fully understood. The Babylonians lived within a polytheistic system inherited from Sumerian culture, refined by Akkadian traditions, and reshaped into Babylonian identity. The pantheon included hundreds of gods, each responsible for aspects of existence: sky, water, storms, birth, healing, law, death, war, writing, farming, divination, and love. People believed that without divine cooperation, nothing functioned. Not rivers, not harvests, not justice, not architecture, not families. Religion was not optional. It was the pulse of civilization. Central to Babylonian cosmology was the idea of divine hierarchy. At the top stood Anu, the sky god, symbolizing celestial authority and cosmic distance. Enlil governed wind and power, controlling storms and kingship. Enki, or Ea, ruled the waters beneath earth, wisdom and magic, guiding human creativity. Shamash, the sun god, embodied truth, justice, and fairness. Ishtar, goddess of war and love, represented fertility, desire, violence, and vengeance combined. One of the most complicated divine figures in ancient myth. Nergal governed death and plague. Sin represented the moon, time cycles, and tides. But in Hammurabi's Babylon, one deity rose above all: Marduk, patron god of the city of Babylon. During Hammurabi's reign, Marduk's political elevation accelerated. Religious identity supported state identity. As Babylon grew powerful, its god gained prominence over the Mesopotamian world. Marduk's myth positioned him as king of the gods, replacing older deities like Enlil. This religious shift helped justify Hammurabi's authority. Even kings required divine legitimacy. According to myth, the universe began in a chaotic ocean containing Apsu and Tiamat, primordial gods embodying fresh and salt water. Younger gods emerged, causing conflict. Eventually, Marduk defeated Tiamat, formed heaven and earth from her body, and created order. Humans were created from clay mixed with divine blood to serve gods, providing offerings and maintaining temples. This myth held deep ideological meaning. Humans owed their existence to cosmic struggle. They were born to maintain order, not chaos. Hammurabi clearly adopted this philosophy. He saw himself restoring divine structure on earth. Religion shaped agricultural routines. Farmers prayed before seed planting and during harvest. Ritual offerings ensured river floods remained gentle and timely. Because irrigation defined civilization, failure of water cycles felt like divine punishment. To please the gods, priests sacrificed animals, burned incense, recited hymns, sang songs, and offered bread and beer. The gods were not distant spiritual abstractions. They were believed to walk among temples, observing human behavior. Daily worship involved household spirits as much as great deities. Families believed in protective guardian beings, lamassu, ghosts of ancestors, divine messengers that influenced dreams and health. People prayed before meals, childbirth, travel, and trade decisions. They carried amulets and clay figurines carved with symbols of gods or sacred creatures. These objects protected against misfortune and invited divine strength. Religion also justified law. Hammurabi claimed Shamash, the god of justice, granted him authority to write laws. The stele depicting Hammurabi receiving law from Shamash served as political theology. The message was clear: disobeying law meant defying the gods. This made legal enforcement stronger than mere political force. Justice possessed sacred meaning. The gods' personalities explained natural disaster. Drukt signaled divine anger. Bus signaled cosmic imbalance. Floods, epidemics, and earthquakes were interpreted as warnings. Religion preserved emotional structure in an unpredictable environment. Religious diversity also existed. Conquered lands maintained local deities who became part of Babylon's pantheon. Hammurabi did not destroy regional beliefs. He incorporated them into a greater hierarchy. This inclusivity strengthened empire unity and prevented rebellion. Thus, the Babylonian spiritual worldview was incredibly rich, filled with symbolism, cosmic struggle, ancestor reverence, divine justice, and emotional meaning. Religion gave Hammurabi the ideological foundation he needed to build an empire, write laws, unify regions, and establish moral authority. Temples were not quiet spiritual sanctuaries. They were dynamic institutions combining economic management, ritual leadership, social education, and political influence. They were as important as palaces, sometimes even more powerful. In Hammurabi's empire, priests functioned like administrators, accountants, judges, architects, astronomers, musicians, doctors, and scholars. Mesopotamian priesthood required intellectual mastery and deep devotion. Temple administration governed huge property networks. Temples owned agricultural fields, livestock herds, and production workshops. They hired laborers, rented land, collected taxes, and distributed rations. A single temple could employ hundreds, sometimes thousands, of workers. Priest bureaucrats recorded every grain sack, sheep birth, and pottery shipment on clay tablets stored in vast archives. Temples were economic engines, powering Mesopotamian civilization. Priests served multiple roles. High priests managed temple estates and legal documents. Ritual priests performed daily sacrifices. Diviners interpreted omens and dreams. Astrologers studied the movement of stars to calculate calendars. Musicians performed hymns during ceremonies. Temple women wove garments used in offerings. Children trained as scribes learned mathematics, writing, and religious doctrine under priest supervision. Priests governed ritual rhythm. Every morning, noon, and evening, priests washed statues of gods, dressed them, burned incense, placed food before them, and sang chants. These rituals maintained cosmic life. The statues were believed to house divine presence, not represented symbolically. Neglecting ritual meant risking divine abandonment. Temple kitchens prepared meals for gods: bread, cakes, honey, milk, fruit, meat, and beer. After presenting food to statues, priests and workers consumed the offerings, connecting human nourishment to divine blessing. Festivals transformed city life. The Akitu Festival, a New Year celebration, was among the most important. During Akitu, priests reenacted Marduk's mythic victory over chaos, symbolizing renewal of cosmic order. The king participated in rituals showing he remained chosen by Marduk. Crowds gathered to watch processions carrying divine statues through streets. Music, feasting, drinking, song, and performance blended spiritual devotion with civic joy. During the marriage festival of Ishtar and Dumuzi, people celebrated fertility and romantic passion, symbolizing nature's renewal. Sacred marriage rituals between priests and priestesses reenacted divine union. Temple complexes included living quarters, libraries, archives, and classrooms. They operated like universities long before modern education existed. Students copied hymns, trained in arithmetic, memorized proverbs, and learned administrative skills. These schools produced generations of leaders and archivists. Cuneiform decipherment in the 1800s opened a door into Hammurabi's world. Scholars like Rawlinson and Hinks decoded inscriptions, enabling translation of thousands of tablets. Through this effort, historians learned about love letters, riddles, jokes, proverbs, mathematics, and recipes, showing that ancient Mesopotamians felt joy, sorrow, love, ambition, and humor. Rediscovery changed modern identity. Museums displayed artifacts that challenged audiences to redefine what civilization means. Hammurabi's Babylon influenced art, literature, and cinema. Many fictional works now portray ancient cities using imagery inspired by archaeological findings. However, archaeology also introduced difficult questions about artifact removal. Hammurabi still remains in the Louvre rather than Iraq. Historians debate whether cultural items should return home. This discussion highlights global interest in Mesopotamian heritage. Modern excavations continue uncovering new materials, expanding understanding of Hammurabi's era. Researchers use satellite imaging to locate buried structures and environmental science to reconstruct farming climate conditions. DNA studies help reveal ancestry patterns. Archaeology grows more precise each decade, proving that Hammurabi's world still speaks, just slowly through soil and stone. In modern popular culture, Hammurabi lives a dual life. On one hand, he represents ancient justice and wisdom. On the other, he symbolizes harsh punishment. These contrasting images reflect how different generations interpret history through their own values. Hammurabi's legacy exists not only in academic books, but in classrooms, museums, movies, novels, debates, video games, and documentaries. Through these representations, new generations meet Babylon. The most common symbol connecting Hammurabi to modern people is the phrase, an eye for an eye. Though often misunderstood, this idea appears in films, literature, and political arguments about justice. Temples also functioned as hospitals. Medical records revealed treatments for wounds, illnesses, and fevers conducted inside temple walls. Priests mixed herbs, used oils, and recited incantations to cure disease. Spiritual and scientific healing blended together. Beyond religion, temples exerted political authority. Priests advised kings, interpreted omens concerning war, and predicted outcomes of battles or weather patterns. A king ignoring priests risked political downfall. Hammurabi maintained strong connections with priest institutions, ensuring cooperation rather than rivalry. Temples protected civic identity. Every city worshipped local gods, maintaining emotional loyalty and pride. Festivals united communities, reinforcing belonging. People who attended these ceremonies felt connected to one another and to the empire. Temple art expressed theological knowledge. Walls bore carved images of lions, dragons, bulls, and winged guardians. Clay reliefs told stories of creation or heroic myths. These images visually communicated ideas to illiterate citizens. Therefore, priesthood formed the intellectual and spiritual foundation of Hammurabi's world. Without priests and temples, Babylonian government, science, art, and law could not survive. Religion in Hammurabi's empire extended beyond worship and temple activity. It entered private homes, dreams, funerals, agricultural cycles, healing methods, and decision-making processes. Babylonian society embraced spiritual complexity, and people believed that magic, omens, spirits, and the afterlife shaped everyday existence. Divination served as one of the most important decision-making tools. Priests and scholars interpreted signs from stars, rivers, animals, and weather patterns. They read livers of sacrificed animals, believing divine messages appeared in organ markings. They interpreted sneezes, birth anomalies, storm direction, and dream imagery. Divination was not superstition to them. It was scientific spiritual analysis. The belief held that gods communicated constantly, and people had responsibility to listen. Magic rituals attempted to control supernatural forces. Protective charms warded off ghosts or demons. Incantation tablets instructed healers to chant sacred lines over water or oil to remove illness. Magic coexisted with medicine. People did not separate physical disease from spiritual influence. A fever might mean infection, but also presence of a malevolent spirit. Thus, healing required both herbs and incantations. Households practiced domestic ritual. Families offered breadcrumbs and drink to ancestor spirits believed to watch over them. If forgotten, ancestors might cause dreams or misfortune. Respect for the dead formed a crucial emotional tradition. Funeral practices emphasized continuity rather than eternal paradise. Babylonians believed the afterlife was a dark, shadowy underworld where spirits lived without joy. Their goal was not heavenly reward, but peaceful remembrance. Proper burial ensured the dead spirit found its rightful place instead of haunting the living. Priests prepared bodies by cleansing them, wrapping them in cloth, and burying them with amulets. Some graves contained food jars for spiritual sustenance. Families visited burial sites to pour offerings and maintain connection. Death also played legal roles. Inheritance required ritual documentation. Widows protected children through contracts. These systems illustrate how afterlife beliefs structured earthly law. Magic also crossed into law enforcement. When evidence was unclear, courts ordered river ordeals, placing judgment in divine hands. People believed gods would save the innocent through floating and drown the guilty. To modern minds, this seems unfair, yet to Babylonians, it symbolized cosmic truth. Spiritual fear shaped moral behavior. Because demons, spirits, and gods observed all actions, people thought twice before lying, stealing, or harming neighbors. Religion policed society without constant soldiers or prisons. Divine surveillance replaced earthly policing. Still, Babylonian spirituality was not based solely on fear. It offered comfort in grief, guidance in uncertainty, communal joy in festivals, creative imagination in myth, and artistic inspiration in poetry. Rituals brought communities together. Singing hymns in temple courtyards created shared emotional identity. Some historians argue Babylonian religion represents early psychological exploration. Dreams were analyzed seriously. Emotional suffering was documented in lament texts. Literature discussed loneliness, fear of death, and search for meaning. These emotional insights show Babylonians were not primitive believers blindly worshiping idols. They were thoughtful, emotional humans trying to understand existence. This religious world powered Hammurabi's empire. Without divine belief, his law code would lose meaning. Without ritual, cities could not unify. Without temple economics, society would starve. Religion defined the soul of Babylonian civilization, guiding how people dreamed, feared, and hoped. Agriculture formed the backbone of Hammurabi's empire. Without organized farming, Babylon could not have supported large cities, temples, armies, or scribal schools. Agriculture was not a simple rural activity. It was a complex system involving irrigation engineering, seasonal scheduling, labor organization, taxation, and religious ritual. Hammurabi understood this deeply. His empire was prosperous because it controlled water, coordinated labor, and protected land ownership through law, preventing agricultural collapse. Mesopotamia, lying between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, depended on seasonal floods. But these floods were unpredictable, too high, and they destroyed fields. too low, and fields dried out. Therefore, Hammurabi invested in irrigation canals, dikes, reservoirs, embankments, and sluice gates to regulate water flow. Through his administration, canals were cleaned, expanded, and monitored to ensure equal distribution. Farmers received water access based on agreements recorded by scribes. Water was life. Control over water meant control over civilization. The Code of Hammurabi contains numerous agricultural laws revealing how seriously farming was treated. If someone neglected a canal and caused flooding that damaged a neighbor's field, the negligent worker had to compensate the loss. This shows collective accountability. Farmers protected one another because mistakes affected everyone. The law discouraged laziness and emphasized responsibility. Crop variety in Hammurabi's Babylon was remarkable. Barley served as the staple crop, used not only for bread but for beer production, a central beverage in Mesopotamian diet. Wheat, dates, lentils, onions, cucumbers, beans, chickpeas, sesame, and flax filled fields. Farmers cultivated orchards and date groves, shaping landscapes with fruit production. Dates provided sweetness, wine-like drinks, oils, and animal feed. Animal husbandry supported agriculture. Sheep produced wool. Goats and cattle provided milk, meat, and traction power for plowing. Oxen pulled plows, expanding planting efficiency. Cattle manure fertilized fields, maintaining soil health. Fishing along rivers supplemented protein needs and contributed to trade. The agricultural year followed seasonal arrangements. In early fall, plowing began when soil softened from river moisture. Workers broadcast seed by hand, plows cutting channels to bury grain. Winter rains nourished crops. By late spring, farmers harvested barley using sickles, bundling stalks into sheaves. Summer months involved threshing and storing grain in clay-lined silos. Agriculture integrated religion. Farmers prayed at planting and harvest, believing gods controlled rain and growth. Offerings thanked deities for abundance. Festivals marked agricultural transitions. Communities shared meals from harvested grain. Land ownership defined social structure. Nobles owned large estates, tended by hired laborers and tenant farmers. Temples possessed land worked by dependents whose grain supported priest institutions. Common farmers often owned small plots passed down within families. Hammurabi protected land rights. Theft or illegal sale of family land brought severe punishment. Through legal enforcement, he prevented land concentration that could destabilize society. Agriculture required cooperation. Large irrigation canals demanded group effort, forcing neighbors to work together. Shared labor strengthened social bonds and community identity. Farmers also needed scribes to measure fields, record yield, calculate taxes, and document contracts. Agriculture fed every part of the empire. Soldiers ate from farmers' labor. Temple priests depended on food offerings. City artisans required grain distribution. Courts relied on tax revenue, funded by agricultural output. By controlling farming networks and irrigation rights, Hammurabi ensured Babylon remained wealthy, stable, and powerful. The economy of Hammurabi's Babylon expanded beyond farming into networks of trade, artisan workshops, and long-distance commercial routes. While land produced grain, Babylonian wealth grew through exchange. Merchants, traders, artisans, and scribes turned surplus into opportunity. Hammurabi recognized that political power required economic strength, so he structured laws to protect business, regulate trade, and support merchants traveling across the Near East. Babylon's economy used silver as currency standard. Instead of coins, silver weights determined value. People weighed small pieces of metal using scales, measuring payment in shekels. Silver payments appeared in land contracts, marriage agreements, and wage records. However, barter also remained common. Grain traded for livestock, fabric traded for tools, and beer sold for vegetables. Babylonian economic life blended old and new systems. Trade routes connected Babylon to distant lands. Merchants traveled north into Assyria to acquire timber and metals. To the east, they reached Elam for copper, stone, and wool. Western routes into Syria and Anatolia carried tin, textiles, jewelry, spices, pottery, and wine. Babylon exported grain, wool, and crafted goods, enriching the empire. Hammurabi encouraged international trade by punishing theft along caravan paths and protecting merchants under law. Craft production flourished. Artisans in cities worked with clay, bronze, leather, reed, and wood, transforming raw materials into finished goods sold locally and abroad. Potters shaped bowls, jars, lamps, and storage vessels used throughout society. Bronze smiths forged weapons, tools, and ceremonial objects. Jewelers carved precious stones like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and agate into beads and amulets. Textile workers spun wool and wove garments. Weaving held particular economic weight. Textile workshops employed dozens of women who produced clothing for temples, soldiers, bureaucrats, and foreign buyers. Wool exports formed major income streams. Laws protected textile business integrity by punishing fraud and theft. Markets served as economic intersections. City squares filled with vendors selling fish, fruit, bread, beer, wine, perfume, herbs, and toys. Contracts recorded disagreements. Buyers often hired scribes to ensure scales and weights were honest. Market life created social energy. Gossip, negotiation, entertainment, and cultural exchange filled every corner. Temples acted as banks. They lent silver, stored goods, and managed savings. Wealthy citizens deposited silver or grain, receiving written receipts. These temples became financial stabilizers. If famine threatened, stored grain preserved lives. Labor contracts regulated wages. Shepherds signed agreements to care for animals, receiving payment after season ended. Builders contracted through scribes to construct homes. If building collapse caused death, builders faced grave punishment. This shows economic responsibility and legal accountability intertwining. Even long-distance commerce depended on law. If merchants lost cargo during sudden disaster, courts investigated liability. If theft occurred, city authorities pursued compensation. Hammurabi's economy valued transparency. Written ledgers prevented corruption. Uniform weights prevented deception. Clear wage laws protected workers. Therefore, Babylon's economic strength was not accidental. It emerged from controlled agriculture, regulated trade, lawful business, skilled craftspeople, and scribal accuracy. Without this economic engine, Hammurabi's legal and military success would have collapsed. Labor in Hammurabi's empire represented more than physical effort. It symbolized social contribution, identity, and economic possibility. Although social class limited opportunities, labor created pathways to improvement. A skilled craftsman might rise economically. A talented scribe could enter government employment. A soldier might receive land rights after loyal service. Babylonian workers came from numerous backgrounds. Free citizens, contract laborers, temple servants, tenant farmers, wage workers, slaves, and apprentices. Each role held unique rights and responsibilities. Labor law ensured employers treated workers fairly, at least according to ancient standards. Wage workers received payment in silver or grain rations. Clay tablets record specific salaries. Scribes earned more than shepherds, builders more than farmhands, soldiers more than tavern attendants. Women working in textile factories received grain rations measured by productivity. Children helping mothers earned smaller shares. Babylonian society acknowledged skilled labor as valuable. Metal workers, stone cutters, potters, and carpenters gained respect, and their services commanded good wages. They taught apprentices through years of supervised work. Contract defined how long apprenticeship lasted, how much training cost, and what tools workers received. Labor involved risk. Builders faced legal danger. If a house collapsed due to poor construction, the builders suffered deadly consequences. Doctors risked mutilation if mistakes harmed wealthy patients. Shepherds bore responsibility for lost animals. Labor law created accountability and professional pride. Large labor groups participated in public works. Canal dredging, wall building, temple restoration, bridge repair, and road construction demanded enormous coordinated manpower. These tasks created employment, but also served political propaganda. Kings claimed credit for public works, proving divine favor. Temple workers formed another major labor class. They cleaned sanctuaries, prepared offerings, tended animals, and copied texts. Their service was spiritual duty and job combined. Some temple workers were free, others were domestically enslaved. Labor also shaped gender identity. Women dominated weaving, beer brewing, food markets, and household service. Men tended fields, herded sheep, built structures, and served in armies. However, roles blurred in rural households where survival required cooperation. Social mobility existed mainly through military or economic success. A soldier who fought bravely might earn farmland that elevated his status. A successful trader could buy property and enter wealthier circles. Slaves could sometimes purchase freedom through wages or receive manumission for loyalty. Workplaces reflected social diversity. A single construction site might include nobles overseeing projects, scribes recording details, common laborers hauling bricks, and slaves mixing clay. This shared environment brought social layers into daily interaction, shaping respect and tension. Job specialization created pride. Craft guilds formed informal identity groups, preserving skills through generations. Children often inherited careers from parents. Working conditions could be harsh. Summer heat scorched fields. Canal dredging exhausted laborers. Disease spread through crowded workshops. Yet communal meals and shared ritual helped workers tolerate hardship. Economically, labor shaped Babylonian values. Productivity symbolized divine blessing. Laziness represented impiety. Work ethic connected to gods, law, and moral duty. Thus, labor in Hammurabi's empire created civilization itself. Workers raised cities from riverbanks, paved markets, crafted tools, baked bread, built temples, recorded documents, and sustained armies. Without labor networks, Hammurabi's political world and his legal masterpiece could not exist. Hammurabi's Babylon did not achieve greatness simply through military success or legal brilliance. It also excelled in engineering and architecture. The great temples, canals, city walls, roads, palaces, and homes of Babylon were not accidental creations. They were products of systematic technical knowledge, refined over centuries. This technological environment shaped the urban world that surrounded Hammurabi. Without innovation, Babylon would have remained a village near riverbanks. Instead, it became a monumental heart of Mesopotamian civilization. Babylonian engineers mastered the use of mud brick, the most abundant building material. Mesopotamia lacked stone forests and quarries, so people used river clay and straw to create sun-dried bricks. These bricks were surprisingly durable when layered with bitumen, a tar-like substance used as waterproofing glue. Bitumen sealed walls from moisture, allowing structures to stand for decades. Builders also used baked bricks for important buildings like palaces and temples. Baking bricks consumed vast amounts of wood fuel, so only major public structures used them. This reveals economic planning behind building priorities. Construction science involved precise geometry. Architects understood how to measure angles, create level foundations, and calculate house dimensions. They surveyed land using rope measurement, wooden rods, and plumb instruments. Houses were aligned to maximize shade and reduce heat. Their orientation also considered wind direction to improve airflow. These choices required awareness of environmental behavior, not random design. Roofs were flat, supported by palmwood beams and reed mats. Families used rooftops as extra living areas, cooking, drying food, and sleeping outdoors during hot nights. Engineers designed drainage channels to move rainwater away from rooftops. If these channels broke, water damage caused collapse risk, so homeowners regularly maintained structures. Large public buildings like ziggurats required astronomical understanding. Builders aligned corners with cardinal directions, meaning they studied sun and star movement. These structures involved layering platforms that narrowed as they rose, distributing weight evenly. Without such innovation, the platforms would crack or tilt. Their success demonstrated mathematical skill and physical engineering knowledge. City walls represent another scientific achievement. Babylonian defensive walls stood thick and high, built to resist enemy attack and seasonal weather. Builders shaped bricks to interlock, increasing structural strength. Towers allowed archers clear visibility. Gates controlled movement. These walls symbolized security and civic pride. Canal engineering may have been the greatest technological accomplishment of Hammurabi's world. Modern society sometimes reduces Hammurabi to a slogan, missing deeper truths. His code also protected widows, orphans, merchants, farmers, and slaves. It established legal contracts, fair wages, and debt relief. Popular culture focuses on severity, but historians emphasize balance. Hammurabi appears in video games like Civilization, where players encounter him as leader figure capable of diplomacy or war. While fictionalized, this representation introduces millions to Babylonian culture. He appears in anime, fantasy novels, and alt history stories, shaping global imagination. Museums across the world display Mesopotamian artifacts, including cuneiform tablets, cylinder seals, and clay models. School students learn to write their names in cuneiform during educational workshops. Hammurabi becomes bridge linking ancient and modern identity. Modern ethics discussions revisit Hammurabi. Human rights scholars debate whether his code shows progress or brutality. Some argue Hammurabi pushed civilization forward by establishing written equality under law. Others criticize class-based punishments. These debates reflect how history inspires dialogue about present justice systems. Hammurabi's world also influences language. Words like Babylon appear in poetry, reggae music, and religious symbolism. Musicians use Babylon metaphorically to represent corruption or imperialism. This usage transforms historical city into symbolic idea, proving cultural memory evolves. Meanwhile, historians reconstruct daily life to humanize Hammurabi's people. Documentaries describe love stories, school struggles, labor disputes, and childhood games. Hallmark discoveries, like children's clay toys, musical instruments, and recipe lists, reveal personalities beneath royal power. Historical novels portray Babylon through character-driven storytelling. Scribes who fall in love, soldiers protecting city walls, tavern keepers brewing beer, priestesses managing temple accounts. Through fiction, readers understand ancient humanity emotionally. Modern science fiction sometimes reimagines Mesopotamian myths into cosmic sagas. Tiamat becomes star-born chaos dragon. Marduk becomes cosmic warrior. Shamash becomes solar intelligence guiding civilizations. These reinterpretations show ancient influence on future imagination. Hammurabi's legacy also reaches political philosophy. Written law codes inspired Enlightenment thinkers to advocate constitutional transparency and citizens' rights. The very idea that rulers must be accountable before law traces back to Babylon. In academic archaeology, Hammurabi symbolizes the moment when humanity transitioned from oral custom to documented civilization. His code marks intellectual milestone, the ability to record complex information permanently. Modern historical studies also emphasize flaws: inequality, slavery, patriarchy, and violence. These critiques encourage honest reflection rather than mythic worship. Understanding Hammurabi requires seeing full picture. Achievements and limitations both define his legacy. Ultimately, Hammurabi lives on because he represents the universal struggle to create justice in a complicated world. His laws remind humanity that society must choose fairness over chaos, structure over confusion, and responsibility over selfishness. Babylon may have fallen physically, but its intellectual foundation endures in law books, classroom lectures, cultural traditions, and human conscience. And that brings our incredible journey across Hammurabi's Babylon to a close. Today on History Teller YT, you learned how a king shaped the world not just through conquest, but through justice and knowledge. You saw how the Code of Hammurabi created fairness, protected the weak, controlled the powerful, and built the foundation for future civilizations. You discovered how agriculture fed an entire empire, how scribes preserved knowledge for eternity, how women held economic strength and family authority, how slaves could rise to freedom, how temples served as brains of civilization, how mathematics and astronomy shaped science, how trade connected cultures, how empire diplomacy changed politics, and how religion guided ethics, identity, and daily life. The moral of Hammurabi's story is this: civilization survives only when law protects people, not rulers. Justice builds stronger nations than swords ever can. Even though Hammurabi lived almost 4,000 years ago, his ideas still shape our world today. Our courts, our contracts, our punishments, our education, our governments, and our belief that society must protect the weak from strong. If this journey opened your imagination, if you felt history come alive, then the story has succeeded. And remember, this is just one civilization among thousands. The ancient world is endless. And here on History Teller YT, we will continue exploring Egypt, Rome, Greece, Persia, Indus Valley, China, Maya, Vikings, and many more forgotten empires waiting to speak again. So don't forget to like this episode, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more deep storytelling, and invite others to join this growing historical community. Thank you for traveling across time with us today. Until the next adventure, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never stop learning. This is History Teller YT, signing off. See you again soon on our next extraordinary journey through time.